Hello, fellow Earthlings. Welcome to the Space Times podcast. I'm Harrison Lambert here with Paul Mayer. Today, we'll be talking about all the exciting times happening in space this week. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoy.
Well, Harrison, thanks for sitting down with me again to chat about the industry we both love so much.
My
A couple
pleasure.
of big things on the docket for today center around the ever-changing and ever-growing launch industry. Both SpaceX and Firefly experienced a couple of setbacks today, and the initial reporting is looking like there were some challenges with the ground testing for the two of those. SpaceX, I don't think, lost anything as a result. I think Firefly wound up losing some of their hardware after the failure. But what did you see about either of these in greater detail?
Yeah, Firefly actually blew up their rocket booster that they needed for launch during a test launch. So that sets them back, like, logistically. It'll be interesting to see if the FAA has to investigate too, because that will further delay them. And they still seem hopeful that they can launch 2 more rockets this year. So even if they had them in stock and they could just move them out to the launch pad, they might get blocked by the FAA investigation, kind of like Starship was. They're moving very similar paths, but Starship's failure is completely different. It was some of the heat tiles shook loose during a vibrational test on the ground, which is interesting given the history of this booster. You know, they've been testing out metal tiles recently with the last few launches, and this booster is actually a reused booster. So, you know, maybe they're seeing some effects from having already flown. That effect might go out to the tiles. And they're also talking about adding like crinkle fit around all of the ceramic tiles. They did the metal tiles and realized it wasn't great. It oxidized way too fast. So it sounds like they're sticking to the ceramic tiles and adding like a crinkle fit around it to try to close up the gaps where the heat can kind of leak in and break stuff or make it worse. So, you know, next launch of Starship is the next generation. It's going to be bigger, and I'm interested to see if they implement some of these updates to the heat shield, especially after the issue they've just faced with this launch.
Makes sense. I mean, I know Starship is their testing ground is in Texas, right?
Yeah, Boca Chica.
Yeah, that's right. Where I thought Firefly was also out of Texas. For some reason I have Firefly in Houston in my mind. Where are they launching?
They're in Austin. They should be in Austin. I know there are test sites down there. I actually don't know where they launch out of.
Interesting. Yeah. So both 2 Texas launch sites, presumably 2 Texas launch sites, 2 Texas companies, both experiencing different setbacks. Starship is delayed, I think, until next week or the week after, but October 13th, I think, is their next penciled in launch site there. So it doesn't look like there's going to be too much of a slippage or delay on their end. But yeah, to your point, if there is FAA holdup for the Firefly Alpha setback and launch, that's going to pose a real big challenge to them hitting their 2 demo launches by the end of the year, which ambitious to begin with, ambitious in smooth sailings and clear waters, but love it for them. So hopefully they're able to stick the landing on that.
Yeah, it looks like Firefly launches out of Vandenberg. And the 2 launches coming up are actually kind of interesting. I think one of them is going to be like Vandenberg makes sense because one of their biggest missions was the Victus Nox mission, and Victus Haze, I believe, is one of the 2 missions they have planned for this year, which is a follow-on to that mission because it was so successful. And the point of that one was it was a military mission to show rapid deployment of space assets using the Firefly rocket. So hopefully this next launch goes well and they're able to show repeated performance of a quick deployment space system.
Yeah, there's also, and this is something that I know that we'd spoken about previously, but the ESA has just recently announced, I think out of the IAC, the International Astronautical Congress, which I believe is held in Sydney this year. But the ESA has just recently announced that they're penning a contract with Avio, the manufacturers of the Vega class rocket, to start building and developing a reusable upper stage, and that contract just got signed. So I know that one of the things that we spoke about previously was how the European launch ecosystem has sort of fallen behind the Chinese and American launch systems that have focused so much on reusability and recyclability. So interesting to see them. Yeah, they're clearly listening, which we love to hear. So they're glad to hear that the ESA is one of our fans here.
Yeah, it's a bit of an odd rocket to choose for reusability. I mean, I think a week ago we had seen that ESA had set aside like 200 million to start doing like hop tests up in Norway for like a fully reusable rocket, much more akin to Falcon 9. But having a reusable upper stage is like, I don't know what other rocket does that. Like Rocket Lab kind of had a proposal to keep the second stage like a clamshell attached, so kind of reusable, but I don't think that ever worked out. So it's interesting why they would go with this. I don't know what value it provides, but it makes sense for the platform. Like it's a small launch rocket, and the first stage is solid boosters, which we've talked about AVO for the past couple of weeks. They're very skilled at making solid boosters. The upper stage is liquid booster, so that's the only place it makes sense to make it reusable. So it may just be like a good rocket, and they want to make it better. And be interesting to see like what value add a reusable second stage has.
I mean, if that's able to add another 15% capacity or another 15% in sort of cost savings or something, even if the majority of the rocket is still the majority of the cost of the rocket is still found in the solid state booster side of the fence there. I mean, that's still steps in the right direction for the, even if they wind up only getting a 15% cost reduction and performance improvement with the second stage of the rocket being reusable, that's still a very meaningful step in the right direction. So it's all progress. It's all moving in the right direction here. So we love to see it, even though to your point, it still does not compete on the same level as the Falcon or any of SpaceX's launch capabilities.
Yeah, it might honestly be just a good demo platform since it's smaller for them to build up the capability and contribute both to the larger ESA ecosystem of launchers, because they work on the Ariane 6 as well. So it might just be that this is a good starting point for them since EU really is getting started. But I just realized like SpaceX, I guess you do have a reusable third stage if you count the Dragon. So it's not totally unheard of. I just think it's a much smaller like value add than having a reusable first stage.
They're eating the elephant one bite at a time. They're just making progress. But yeah, good to see that they're getting started with that. Other launch news coming out of Seattle is that Blue Origin plans to ramp up the launch cadence and fleet size for the new Shepard. They're getting a lot of demand for this vehicle class, and their goal reportedly is to hit a weekly cadence after they get their fleet size up to 3, after they get all the wheels moving, everything in the right direction here. They want to hit a weekly cadence. How many? They're on closer to an annual cadence of launch.
They've only done 3. They had the Katy Perry one last, I think. I don't think there was one after that.
Right. So that is another massively ambitious plan, but there's a lot of talented people at Blue Origin. I feel confident that they will be able to solve these problems and they'll be able to overcome the milestones that they set for themselves, even if it takes maybe a little while longer than they're targeting. I think their goal is to get that cadence up and running next year. I don't remember when in 2026 they wanted to start hitting a weekly launch cadence.
I would say like March 2027 and 2026, given their track record.
I agree with you. I think that is still ambitious to hit a weekly cadence in March 2027, but I do think they will hit that launch cadence. I do think they have the capability to build that out and actually achieve this. Though
I don't even question
it's probably going to take them longer than they want.
I mean, yeah, like I don't even question the technical capability of it. Like they've done it, they can obviously do it again. But like, where's all the demand coming from? Like everything I've heard is that human space flight for fun is not that profitable. But I guess I'm wrong. I don't know. We'll find out.
I don't know. You must not be on the group chat. You must not be on the right text.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you hopping on? Are you getting your bus ticket?
I'll call Jeff. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. I sold him some shower curtain rings back in '87.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I hear they use that for some of the aero surfaces.
So the unfortunate elephant in the room this week is the government shutdown and the impacts that that's likely to have on the aerospace industry. We already know that the FAA and NASA are shuttering a lot of their operations, and a lot of folks are going on furlough for the time being. There's some definite immediate negative impacts, and there's some potential longer term and longer lasting consequences of this sort of sudden shock to the aerospace and defense ecosystems. Though, strictly speaking, national security and defense spending will continue unabated. There's still going to be, I think, enough overlap and enough avenues for acquisition and appropriations delays that this is something the aerospace industry is going to feel more acutely than most other industries out there. This combines more or less with some of the research that we've seen out of Peraspera. But there's an article from Peraspera that came out earlier this week, in so many words, assessing the deep tech investment ecosystem on the VC side of things is a little bit boisterous, a little bit overinvested, a little bit overpriced. The thesis, in so many words, of the article was that the trend in the deep tech industries has been to invest in and bet on the bigger plays, to bet on the bigger, more ambitious, more capital intensive, longer timeline projects, and to lean into the mantra that bigger is better. And while in a bull market that can be true, in a rising tide where all ships are sort of being lifted, where everybody's doing better off, big swings tend to wind up paying off a little bit better than smaller swings do. So there can be some thought to that. But the concern is obviously that if everybody starts doing that, if the entire ecosystem, if the entire market starts executing in that same pattern, if everybody is using the same thesis or has the same ideas, well, then you start to see prices come up, you start to see valuations come up, and you start to see that sort of payoff. You start to see the potential return of all of that really wash out and bottom out. And so the challenge there is sort of twofold. One, that there's already sort of a downward pressure on valuation, sort of a downward pressure on price. The claim in the article amounting to, hey, we should be looking smaller, looking more pragmatically, smaller steps, more plays that accomplish a smaller number that solve a smaller number of problems, and then we get more of these wins on the table, and we end up solving the same big problem that some of these previous bigger swings would try to solve all at once. The challenge here is that, well, one, there's too much money in some of these bets, so there's some downward pressure on these prices, there's some downward pressure on the size of all of this. We need to pull that in, tighten that up. The other reason why this is bad is that the timeline slippage from the potential government shutdown, or the government shutdown and the potential timeline slippage to federal funding, to federal contracts, all of that will push out potentially a return on investment or a liquidation event for investors by 2 to 3 years, let's just say, from a hat. Well, a $10 return today and a $10 return 2 to 3 years from today will absolutely kill your present value. It'll absolutely kill your IRR, absolutely kill your immediate valuation. So because aerospace is one of those industries where so much of it, broadly speaking, we'll say 50% of the aerospace industry is directly dependent on federal spending via government contracts, the defense industry, what have you. And then 50% of the 50% remaining is the commercial industry. A good portion of that private commercial industry itself is also ultimately derived from the federal industry, meaning that a lot of those commercial demands, a lot of those commercial needs, a lot of those commercial customer signals and market signals are sort of taking their cues from the federal side of things. So it's not out of scope or out of reason to imagine that a 6-month slippage to a federal spending program could lead to a 2-year slippage on executing on some commercial deliverables, which would lead to some really hard times for the folks who are investing in these startups and in this ecosystem, which would put a lot of downward pressure on the valuation and on investment and fundraising in there. So we may see some long-term consequences as a result of this.
Yeah, I mean, launch delays are a plague across the entire industry. Like, that's usually the worst thing you can hear, is that you're not going to make your launch delivery, and something as kind of hand of God as this, out of your control, like, that's going to really screw up quite a few missions. And being able to recover from that is going to depend on how much money you have in the bank to weather that setback. So it's not just about like not getting your contracts paid out on time, but it's also the impact to your like mission schedule and the penalties you'll have to pay for that. And as you mentioned, like the setbacks to development and the cycle of development that you get from being able to launch and test and fly again.
Yeah, there's some definite challenges that we can expect in the aerospace industry as a result of the government shutdown. I mean, I think not directly tied to the government shutdown, NASA's budget has also been largely trimmed back. I think they were expecting a 25% reduction in the budget top line 2026 from 2025, which is always going to hurt the space industry, space exploration, and aerospace industries. Though we are seeing the budgets for Space Force and Air Force increase. So it's even though there's some cutbacks from NASA explicitly, we might expect to see more spending and more money going into the ecosystem overall, just coming from more of an explicitly defense focus or more of a defense value prop. So there we're likely to see a little bit of repositioning of some of our peers and friends in the industry, some folks that we spoke to last week who might be building out sensors for space domain awareness, might be building out sensors to track missiles next week when we talk to them, that sort of thing. So yeah. we might see some reframing and a little bit of repositioning of some of the capabilities in the ecosystem to solve the problems of the ultimate federal customers where the money is coming from. There were also a couple of larger updates in the space domain awareness ecosystem, notably, and we'd already spoken about this previously, but there's been some more progress between Neurospace and ArcSec planning on building out, I believe, 3-centimeter accurate debris tracking in space. So Portugal and Belgium working together to help solve this problem. China has also issued a few statements. They're calling for and pushing for more on-orbit awareness, more orbit monitoring, more debris tracking in the ecosystem. Everybody wants to keep space safe. Nobody wants to have to worry about undocumented debris or untracked orbit maneuvers. And because of some of the progress of some of the tug ecosystems and tug companies that we've spoken about, and the multi-orbit solutions that we've spoken about previously, we're starting to see the demand and readiness for that awareness, mapping, and tracking really start to catch on.
Yeah, it's interesting because they had recently brought up the issue with basically not having a global flight control for launches, but also for on-orbit tracking. just so that they can avoid collisions. But they also are, on the flip side of that, avoiding this problem in a large part because they tend to launch a lot of their satellites to middle Earth, medium Earth orbit. Like their presence in LEO is significantly smaller than the U.S. space assets. So they're kind of avoiding some of this collision avoidance stuff. Like they just launched the Yaogan 45 this last week, which was SpySat being in MEO. They get a little more persistent imagery over presumably the US, although it might actually be over China. But the fact that they're able to put imagers in medium Earth orbit and have use for them means they can pretty much do anything from there. So I'm surprised this is an issue that they're bringing up.
Yeah, I've seen about a dozen, well, maybe not a dozen, but I've seen over a half dozen different companies pitch in the ecosystem who are in the debris tracking or debris deorbiting business in one way or another. So in the US, there is an ecosystem, and in Europe, there is an ecosystem that exists for tracking debris, for tracking orbits, for orchestrating on orbit assets. Most of the excitement that I've seen has been more in that orchestration layer than it has been in the debris tracking layer explicitly. Yeah. And part of the reason for that is that part of the reason for the lack of interest in explicitly the debris tracking layer is that historically NASA has done a really good job of tracking and sort of keeping that data relatively up to date. So sort of a common good already, publicly available good that nobody really wants to pay for if you can get it for free.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of challenge to overcoming that, but as we've already spoken about a little bit today, that's not something that we can really continue to rely on. We are going to need to actually start solving these problems, and having a central data repository would be a great way to do that. I mean, we could obviously go about having dozens or hundreds of different fragmented databases that all capture some portion of the orbital traffic and the debris on orbit, but finding a way to consolidate all of that information and aggregate all of those data sets would be truly impactful for the space industry as a whole.
Yeah, but it also makes you think, like, wouldn't it be helpful for each competing nation to know where all of the other assets are? So, like, I think the level of trust needed for like a truly useful data sharing platform is not going to be there.
No, it's not. You're absolutely right. In order to solve the challenges of debris and on orbit traffic, the underlying assumption has to be that everybody's on the same team, so to speak, and that's obviously not the case. So a better analogy might be more vessel or like submarine tracking sort of thing, where it's like, hey, like maritime awareness, maritime tracking, like we have ways to sort of track and keep aware of this, but at the same time, there's a lot of effort that goes into making sure that some of our ships and assets cannot be tracked or are not tracked, or it's going to be hard to create a truly monolithic answer for anything in this space, for sure.
This feels like it's very strategic to kind of the state that we're in right now. Like there's that back and forth going on between the US and Europe jointly against China and demonstrating our rendezvous proximity operations on orbit. The Shijian 21 that they launched over the summer to demonstrate RPO and GEO was also a debris mitigation satellite, and it actually ended up refueling one of their satellites in GEO. So this thing was it's built as a spy satellite, but they were demonstrating that it could refuel, it could move around in proximity to other satellites. And it has space debris mitigation, which I find very odd for GEO, because that's usually not a concern up there. It's usually micrometeorites, not space debris. So
Right.
I wonder if there's a concern they see for space debris in geo, especially I think mainly if you're in RPO operations, if a bunch of satellites just kind of cluster together and start operating on each other, like I could see how you would get a debris field there.
Well, I think one of the more cynical views would be that, if you, I mean, what's to prevent me from saying that you and I are in a fight? What's to prevent me from saying that your satellite or your space asset itself is the debris that I'm solving?
Yeah.
So there might be a little bit of implications in that word choice as well.
Yeah. Like they just think our GPS satellites are trash. So they're just taking it out.
Well, I meant more showing that, like, hey, this is a quote unquote debris cleaning satellite. So we're going to send it to an area that we know has no debris so that it can clean debris. Like there may be some sort of positioning or messaging intended with that, but maybe I'm reading too much into it. Again, I didn't go to school for political science. I didn't go to school for a lot of things. Some other big moves in the industry that we've noticed over the past week are increased, sort of across the board almost, but increased government involvement in spending and space defense. So Canada quite recently announced their, see if I can remember the acronym correctly, but the Defense Industrial Strategy, which involves several billion dollars for defense partnerships and dual-use space applications. They're all in all, I think they're setting aside 8 or 9 billion over the next several years to increase their defense spending, a large portion of which is dedicated for dual-use space technologies. This is consistent and sort of in alignment with some of the trends that we've seen from the German space program, from Finnish space efforts and their demand for SAR technologies, Japanese efforts and their demand for SAR technology and capability, and also some American, Australian, and European efforts more broadly as well. So we're seeing this effort in a very systematic and non-isolated pattern to increase defense spending in the space domain. Additionally, there's some spending. I think the UK allocated a good chunk for technologies to protect satellites from laser and jamming threats,
Well, what's the chunk
for on orbit.
What's the size of the chunk? Because I think this is great.
A half million.
So on the back of Germany spending $30 billion on their space industry, UK is like, watch, hold my beer. We'll take whatever we get. It's in pounds, so that could be, millions of dollars.
Oh man. Oh, you got me.
500,000 pounds. I don't think they make launch vehicles that strong.
No, they don't make anything that heavy. They don't make anything that heavy. That's almost 25 tons. That's a lot.
I always screw up converting metric to imperial.
It's a 2.2. So in addition to Canada's increased 9 billion in dual-use space tech, the UK is also on the case here. They've allocated a whopping half million pounds for specifically satellite protection from laser and jamming threats. So much more targeted, and certainly not enough to keep up with Canada's expenditure or Germany's expenditure. I think we spoke about it last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, but Germany just allocated, what was it?
It was like 32 billion.
Germany allocated a whole heck of a lot to their space defense programming.
Yeah, it was a big investment. That's like 3-4 times the amount that China spends per year. Granted, they didn't say how many years that's spread over, so it's probably about what we would see. But I think Germany really stepping in to be like a leader in the EU aerospace domain with that level of funding.
Clearly, with that level of commitment and seeing the comparable levels of commitment from the UK and from other European nations, I think it's fair to say that Germany is very much taking a leadership position.
I mean, I think they want to, because traditionally, like, France has been the like aerospace headquarters, and Avio, we keep mentioning, is in Italy. There's the rocket Augsburg or something out of Spain. So like a lot of the aerospace is focused down in the south of Europe. I think Germany is looking to position themselves, higher on the heap.
I think given this year's Formula One performance, I would trust Team Mercedes with space defense over Team Ferrari.
I can't wait for the Mercedes rocket, man. That's the next level.
Well, it follows for me. Some other big trend, big news items out there this week were the large contract award for Blue Origin to deliver the NASA lunar rover intact. The Viper delivery was awarded to Blue Origin, I believe, $190 million contract. That's a key part of the Artemis Lunar Gateway program. So despite potential timeline slips due to the furlough and shutdown, NASA is still moving forward with the Artemis program, which is great to see. Even though there's potentially going to be some years-long delays to things, Blue Origin is already on the hook there.
Because this is the same Blue Moon lander that they lost the contract for like years ago, and then just started suing Congress like nonstop to get money. So it looks like it finally worked.
This is that same saga.
Yeah, they've been suing them nonstop for like 4 years now, and it looks like it finally worked. Granted, and this is my only consolation here, SpaceX got like $2.4 billion for Starship when they won in that competition. I think Dynetics was the other one. But they're only getting $190 million, and Starship still has like the lead on the contract. But I think what you said is right. Like, it's the part of the gateway, whereas Starship's not really. It's its own thing.
Yeah, I think didn't we bid for that as well?
Yeah, I think Dynetics was partnered with Maxar.
Yeah, so we bid for that. We didn't win it. Shucky darns, but
yeah,
we certainly were excited about it.
Well, Dynetics did too, but they weren't the ones that were complaining about lawsuits in the space industry and then turned around and put a bunch of lawsuits into the space industry.
Right. That's how, see, kids, that's how you make progress, is rather than complaining, you just do. And then you still lose to the folks who complain.
Yeah.
But speaking of Maxar, they've rebranded as Vantor and Lantaris. The two different branches of Maxar Space Systems now becoming Lantaris Space Systems, and Maxar Intelligence now becoming Vantor. So that, I think, is the last vestiges of the Maxar Digital Globe, or Space Systems Around Digital Globe MDA acquisition roll-up that was Maxar Technologies.
Yeah, I just love the progression now from Ford Aerospace to Lantaris. It's quite the transition.
How long did that take? Ford Aerospace was what, 50s, 60s?
Yeah, late 50s. They were one of the first.
Yeah.
Ford, Philco, L'Oreal, Maxar, Lantaris.
It's a little bit surreal. It makes it's weird to feel so dated.
Yeah. I remember back when it was called L'Oreal.
Those are some of the big heavy hitters that we've got for this week. My personal favorite story that I saw this week, and I hope you'll share about it if you managed to see it, was the announcement that Lockheed Martin and NASA had started exploring a business model to make the Orion spacecraft available as a service to customers.
This is another case of like, who are these customers? Like New Shepard has so much demand for like just getting people up to high altitudes, and now the world's most expensive, dangerous, large lift rocket has some market for launching people as well. Like, I guess the moon, like maybe they're looking that far ahead where they're saying like, oh, we'll launch a private citizen to another planet. Like, sure. But I don't see anything short term where this is valuable.
I can't think of something that I would expect less to be treated, quote, as a service than a spacecraft.
You have to pay per mile. When you run out, the rocket just shuts off.
For our premium plan of an additional $10.95 a month, you don't get ads.
Yeah, over the window, you just can't see our space.
Well, I think we should jump into the lightning round here. There's a handful of acquisition and contract updates, or I guess funding and contract updates over the past week and change that we want to hit on. Some of these we've already spoken about a little bit. Some of these are things that we've already spoken about in previous weeks that have a little bit more information publicly available now. But there's the big Blue Origin contract wins that we spoke about, the aerospace and ArcSec agreement that we already hit on. Firehawk Aerospace won an AFWERX TACFI. I believe that was $4 million. We saw a $150,000 NASA contract go to Solstar Space.
Actually, I'm really curious what this is. Like, is it Wi-Fi for the moon?
Well, I think it's to provide Wi-Fi capability persistently for the lunar economy, for lunar assets that will be able to connect to Wi-Fi.
Okay, I think it's just a local network for the moon.
Yeah, that's what the payload article is alluding to.
Okay.
That it's intended to be a local network for the moon to provide connectivity for the hardware assets that will need to be there.
I was gonna say, like, I wonder what applications that can be expanded to. I don't know if it's really useful for the Earth. I would think the atmosphere would be the big problem because Wi-Fi is not like passing through thick atmosphere. But it is, I do think there's a lot of value in just developing the hardware for Wi-Fi because it's not very rad hardened or developed in our industry, but it would be a very useful technology. Like, it solves a lot of networking problems on board a spacecraft, but people have been so versed to it because the hardware is very unreliable. So if this company can develop some improvements in that aspect, that would be really cool.
I mean, radiation shielding is one of the things that I've seen getting a lot of attention and traction this calendar year. SmallSat, there were a dozen different companies all focusing specifically on radiation shielding and radiation hardening, but ways to provide radiation capable solutions that drastically increase the compute and electromechanical complexity of the hardware stacks that can go into deep space or past orbit effectively. So there's a lot of capabilities there, and so I would not be surprised if Solstar Space were in fact building this off the back of some radiation shielding or radiation hardening innovations that they've made.
Yeah, but it's really the modem that they need to work on because, like, the rad hardening is usually for processors, and it's usually like AMD, Intel. I think China has Lunsan as well, but a more diversity in chips that can survive space would be very welcomed. Yeah,
for sure. Let's see, another familiar name, Proteus Space won a big NASA award for multi-mission spacecraft design contracts. Love to see that. Love to hear that Proteus Space is making progress and doing well. And let's see, Galactic Energy raised a $336 million Series D. Harrison, what can you tell us about that one?
I believe that one's the launch vehicle company for China. It's either the launch vehicle company or it's the mega constellation company. Oh, no, it is a launch vehicle. Series 1 is their main rocket. So this is likely an investment into either heavy lift capability, which I believe is what that one's for. Series 1 is meant to be a heavy lift vehicle because they don't really have a heavy lift. The Long March has a couple variants, but they don't. I think they're trying to bolster their commercial network of launch providers. Yeah, this one's not. The LM8, I believe, is the one that's going for reusability. So my guess is it's for the Series 1, either develop a heavy launch rocket or a reusable heavy launch rocket.
Interesting. Well, we'll talk more next week in our special episode on the Redshift report about some of China's launch capabilities, which should be a fun conversation. So look forward to that. But in addition to the big raise out of Beijing for galactic energy, there were a couple of other raises that we haven't had the chance to mention yet. But Icarus raised 6.1 million, a relatively healthy seed round led by Soma Capital. Icarus is building out space cargo robotics. So fun company to keep an eye on and keep track of. And Until Labs raised a $58 million Series A, led by a Founders Fund, for organ cryopreservation.
What? That has to do with space? Oh, they want to like freeze people down for deep space travel.
That's right.
That's wild. 58 million Series A. So they've been at this.
They've been at this for a while. For now,
this year 2024. So they blew through their seed. Wow.
Well, somebody's got to do it.
They raised over 100 million with a 58 million Series A. I'll be really interested to see what they come up with.
It'll be interesting to see how the I'll say space travel and longevity industries end up overlapping.
Yeah, I feel like this is one of those like companies where you get like you develop it for space, but it finds Earth applications.
Right.
And that's some deep tech.
Yeah. And then we've got a couple of major tech advances that I wanted to hear your opinions on and your thoughts on.
Yeah,
we've got a handful of those. Let's just run through them.
Yeah, they're not like major tech. They're just kind of like cool tech that was brought up this week that I feel is worth mentioning. There was a research in Japan that proposed a dual nozzle design spacecraft for debris removal. So the idea being that an ion thruster on a spacecraft has a nozzle pointing in opposite directions. So it only fires one to like maneuver around orbit. And then once it gets in front of its debris target, it fires both at the same time so it won't move. And the exhaust of the plasma thruster is what deorbits the debris. So I thought that was a pretty novel idea. I feel like the delta V calculations don't really work out because it's really hard to like change orbits that much. But it's a neat approach. I don't think I've heard of anybody using the actual exhaust of an ion thruster to move debris around. So kudos for the creativity. NASA's Psyche spacecraft just performed a 350 million kilometer distance optical communication prior to it kind of going quiet for a while as it goes for its asteroid. Psyche being the asteroid mining spacecraft that's going to go explore an asteroid for heavy metals. So I have not heard of a further distance connection with an optical terminal. I think over the past weeks, we've been getting like more and more excited by further distances. We had Kepler Lab doing one from space, like LEO to a plane, which was cool, but the distance was not as impressive as China's demonstration from GEO to Earth with a 2 gigabit per second laser comm link. And I'm guessing this laser comm link is a lot lower throughput, but 350 million kilometers. That's an order of magnitude higher than Geo to Earth. So very impressive. There's a researcher at Columbia that proposed a novel way for interstellar travel by creating what they call a helio spin launch, which is effectively creating a little pinwheel where you paint one side black and one side white, obviously like maybe more or less reflective. I'm forgetting the name of what that thing is, but it has a specific name. But effectively the idea is that you use the solar winds to spin up this little helio pinwheel fast enough that when you like unlatch the vehicle, that it just goes flying off into interstellar space. I think they're targeting like, I forget, but it can get it up pretty fast. I feel like there's definitely a size limit to how this would work, but we've seen similar missions, not for like a decade, but they've launched very, very small like spacecraft, usually with solar sails, into interstellar space. So it'd be interesting if they tried again with this. I have to imagine it'd be with a small satellite. And then Inversion announced their Arc spacecraft this week, which is a pretty novel spacecraft. I don't think it's the first time it's been proposed or potentially done. Because I think technically you could talk. So the Inversion Arc spacecraft is meant to be like an orbital delivery vehicle. So it sits in orbit with some sort of cargo and on command can deorbit to a specific place on Earth. Which,
wait, what?
Yeah.
So the spacecraft has a payload, and then upon request, it will deorbit the payload.
Yeah. So the idea is like it floats in an orbit above like a war zone, and if they need resupply, it just deorbits to resupply. So it's just sitting there ready to, bring in more ammo or something.
Interesting.
Which reminds me of like the Thor, like the rods from God concept back in the Cold War.
Right.
They want to like drop tungsten rods from space.
This
Or like the Corona satellite that would eject like film canisters from space. This seems very Cold War-esque.
Yeah. Well, isn't that actually like before we had the capability of sending big enough data back to actually get pictures? Like, isn't that how the first pictures from space were actually taken? Was deorbiting actual film?
Yeah. And catching it with like a helicopter.
That, you know what? That's wild. I love it.
Yeah. Between that one and the Until Labs, I'll be keeping a close eye on those two companies because they are interesting to say the least.
So that'll do it for this week on the Space Times podcast. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Again, I have been Paul Nair with Harrison Lambert. We will be back next week for an in-depth dive into the Commercial Space Federation report that was released earlier in September, titled Redshift. It should be a very interesting technical and business dive into the contents of that article and the implications for American space industries. As always, we're grateful for your company. Thank you so much for joining us.